people get selective about what they get mad about. They want to depict, what looks like a different geographical origin. To me, that's actually well within the license that the original texts give us. Hi, I'm Jackson Crawford. I'm a specialist in the Old Norse language and Norse mythology. I'm a translator of the Norse myths, and I have taught Norse mythology and related subjects at UCLA, UC Berkeley, and the University of Colorado. Now I'm a full-time public educator using YouTube and my books, trying to spread good information about these subjects. Today, I'm here to watch the trailer for the new God of War Ragnarok.
The prophecies say Fimbulwinter leads to Ragnarok.
All right, so Fimbulwinter, let me just talk a minute about what that is. In the poem Völuspá, which is the prophecy of Ragnarok, we are told that the great conflict between the gods and their enemies, Ragnarok, will be preceded by, in Old Norse, Fimbulvetur. Vetur means winter. Fimbul is a prefix that more or less means terrible or tremendous, so it's the terrible winter. And during that winter, there will be no summer, but 3 winters altogether. So, of course, a time of famine. So Freya turning into a hawk is an interesting little vignette there. She does have what's called her falcon skin, her Valshamr, which apparently does allow you to turn into a falcon, and which we actually mostly in the Eddas see used by Loki, who borrows it from her to use to fly to other realms. I like the 2 ravens when Odin is mentioned for the first time. Of course, Odin has 2 ravens named Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who fly around the world and bring back to him the news in the evening. They apparently actually are embodiments of his thought and memory, because if he loses them, he apparently loses his thought and memory.
What if there was someone who could help us?
You mean Tyr, the old god of war in these lands?
I think it's interesting that Tyr is called the old god of war. I think potentially what this is being sourced from is a very popular idea that Tyr was the original head of the Norse pantheon of gods and that Odin later displaced him. There actually isn't that much evidence for this, but it's become a popular meme among people interested in this because his name, Tyr, is actually, if you roll back all the sound changes, from the same Proto-Indo-European name as the name of Zeus or Jupiter, implying that he must once have been a very important god, or at least a god related to the sky like Zeus or Jupiter is. And then his designation as god of war, that really comes from the fact that his day is Tuesday, right? He's given the same day as Mars is. In fact, in the Eddas, he's not a really big figure. If he ever was a more significant god than he later became, he's long since been sort of demoted by the time that our written sources come together. His main role is as a figure of order. When the gods imprison the wolf Fenrir, who will kill Odin at Ragnarok, Tyr is the only one who will put his hand in the wolf's mouth as a pledge that they're not going to bind the wolf forever when they're wrapping it up in a chain. Of course, the chain does bind the wolf Fenrir until Ragnarok, so the wolf bites off Tyr's hand. And everyone laughs but Tyr, we are told. That is Tyr's main role. I note that the figure of Tyr here appears to have 2 hands, if I did catch that correctly, so that's interesting. At any rate, he's not an oppositional figure to Odin. He's not considered dead. He's not locked up somewhere. All of this is new to the God of War universe.
Come in. What in all yarns be the happened to him?
In the IGN review of this trailer that I looked at previously, these dwarves were identified as Sindri and Brokr. Those are the 2 dwarves who made Thor's hammer Mjolnir. I don't know who this guy with the squid is. There's no... this is, I think, unique to the game. I don't believe there's any squids in the Eddas, and it looked like his name was given as Durlin. That does look a little bit like our classic dwarf names, like Durin and Doin and Dvalin, that come up in the Eddas and sagas, and that, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien borrowed for the names of the dwarves in The Hobbit. The name Durlin doesn't occur in The Guy with the Squid. This doesn't occur in the Eddas that I know of, but looks like an interesting guy to have around. All right, so this is our only tiny little reveal of Thor in the trailer, right? We see him brushing aside his hammer like a duelist in a Western. I like that. I think it's a cool way to introduce him. So Mjolnir is made by the dwarven brothers Sindri and Brokr. Actually, they make it on a bet with Loki. Loki tries to prevent them from making it as cool as it's going to be, and so he actually bites one of them between the eyes. I believe he bites Brokr between the eyes while they're forging it, so he gets blood in his eyes, and they end up cutting the shaft too short. So it's a very short-shafted hammer, which is how it's always portrayed. And we have many portrayals of it because hundreds, I believe more than 800 pendants representing Mjolnir have been found from the Viking Age. The hammer has various powers. It is so heavy that even Thor needs to wear special gloves and a special belt in order to lift it. When he's deprived of the gloves and belt, he cannot use his own hammer. Only his son Magni is strong enough to lift it without the special stuff. And it can return to him when it is thrown, no matter how far it is thrown. And one of its lesser known powers is it can actually shrink so that he can wear it as a pendant and disguise himself as just an average everyday Viking or metalhead. I don't know what the glowing eyes of Tyr and Mimir mean. There's no epic source for that. It may well be something that's justified by the internal logic of the game world, but just for the record, it's not ever mentioned specifically in the Eddas.
Moments of crisis. Harness it.
There's no creature described as a centaur in our Norse sources. The closest thing is there is a guy in one of the mythical sagas, the saga of Hrolfraki and his champions, who is called Moose Frothi. By the way, his dad is a bear and his mom is a human, but he's half moose, so he's a moose from the navel up. We're not told if he's kind of like a centaur if he has 4 moose legs, or if he's kind of like a satyr and has just 2 moose legs. So that might be the closest thing, but no, it's not really a feature of Norse myth.
We're trying to stop Ragnarok, to help people. And what if the only way to do that is war?
During Ragnarok, all of the gods face off with their foremost enemies. And so we have several specific duels that are mentioned as taking place. So Odin will fight Fenrir the wolf, Thor will fight Jormungandr, Midgard serpent, Freyr will fight Surtur, who is possibly a Jotun, possibly a different kind of being. He's associated with fire, fights with a sword made of fire. Tyr will fight either Fenrir himself also or another evil canine figure, and Heimdallr will fight Loki. And the gods will kill their enemies, but their enemies kill them. And Surtur, the fire being, survives, and once all the gods are dead, he lights everything that's left on fire, and the whole world sinks into the sea. All of this is kind of related to the Norse conception of these realms, which is not planets, right? They're not different. They're not on different planes, right? There's one sort of map. There's one Earth, if you will, and it's all going to burn and drown. So it will be interesting to see if the other gods who have major duels show up, and if the duels are the same. The prophecy that we have in the poem Völuspá and the Poetic Edda does not mention every single god, but these poems also tend to be very elusive. They assume we already kind of know the story, and so they're giving us highlights. They are entertaining us or informing us by focusing on particular vignettes. And it's a little bit unclear what's happening with the gods who are already dead. Baldur is dead before Ragnarok. He will actually come back after Ragnarok. That's another part of the story, is the world is reborn afterwards and some gods return. But what is he doing while he's the afterlife during this time? So there's poets 800, 900, 1,000 years ago did not anticipate our questions today, that we would want there to be kind of a mythopedia where we could look up, who's doing what when. They just give us these little hints like that. And so in some ways, there's actually a lot of creative free reign that you could take in portraying these events. Odin wants to stop it. So fate is very fixed in the Norse conception. Each one of us has a particular day we're going to die. We usually don't know what that date is, but on that date we will die no matter what. And the gods have the same thing, and usually that death date is Ragnarok. Odin knows it's inevitable, but this is actually why Odin has his Valkyries gather up all of the men killed in battle, because they then join his army in Valhalla, and they will help him fight the wolf. He's trying to build up the best army that he can of experienced warriors from Earth, but in the end it won't matter, because we are told by Völuspá that the wolf simply swallows him. All right, now this is actually my biggest problem with this whole thing. I'm a language guy, a runes guy. So the circle in the middle of the logo here, we see God of War, this blue omega with circling letters around it. I talked in the last video that we did about how the runes that are used here were the runes used to write a much earlier stage of the language than Old Norse. So in fact, you wouldn't expect the word to be Ragnarok. At the time Elder Futhark was written, you would expect it to be more like Ragino Raku, something like that. Looking past all that stuff that I complained about last time, because I'm a spoil sport about runes, this doesn't even say what it's supposed to say by their own terms, because this actually says Rangarko, so the letters are out of sequence. I'm just amazed no one has called them on that. And then I'm told that the lady at the end is Angrboda. She is a Jotun. People often use the translation giant for the Old Norse term Jotun. I don't like giant for it because it sounds like they are bigger than the gods, or that they look particularly different from the gods, like they're a different species or something. They aren't. They're described as looking just like the gods do, like humans. and being the same scale as the gods. So one term I've experimented with using for them is anti-gods, because they're of about the same stature, about the same kind of powers, they're just opposed to the gods. So Angrboda was a Jotun, or anti-goddess. Her name actually means something like sorrow offerer. You can see Angr, it's related actually to the English word anger. And she and Loki are the parents of Hel, the half undead looking, half living looking queen of the afterlife, as well as of the Midgard serpent and Jormungandr, and Fenrir the wolf that will kill Odin at Ragnarok. As you can tell from the fact that the two humanoid beings, the parents of, for example, a snake and a wolf, there's no Mendelian squares in mythology. People just have children that look like whatever, right? You know, we find people whose parents are wolves or whatever. So that's kind of a fun detail. As was pointed out in the other IGN video about this, they have already encountered the Midgard serpent Jormungandr. We saw that in the previous game. So I don't know if she's supposed to be its mother in this, but I guess we'll find out from more details later. Well, so first of all, what I'd say is if people are upset that not all of the beings depicted here are white, I would say that in return, they're also not speaking Old Norse, right? So, I mean, if you want to say, well, this doesn't seem historically pertinent to this period of time, well, neither is the language that they're using. You know, again, even on its own terms, either even the runes that they're writing. So people are selective about the things that are perhaps anachronistic that they get upset about. As far as skin color, no, there is really not discussion in the myths of skin color in the terms that we talk about it today. I say in the terms we talk about it today because they do make a big deal out of the fact that the lower classes look different from the upper classes because the lower classes are sunburned. People who work outside in the fields, they're going to get sunburned from all that work outside, whereas people who are wealthier can stay indoors more and are not going to be as sunburned. You end up with really denigrating descriptions of peasants. Old-time translators of the Eddas and Sagas often took these terms for sunburned and used terms that seem more racialized to readers today, but they are not racialized in the original text. And in fact, in the sagas, we do occasionally meet people of African descent because, of course, the Vikings got all over the place. What's interesting is that that color of skin in Old Norse is described as blue. Now, my PhD dissertation is actually about how Old Norse describes color, so I can get deep into the weeds about this. But suffice it to say that Old Norse does not talk about color exactly the way that English or most modern languages do. Like I said, I think people get selective about what they get mad about. Personally, I'm a guy who's into language and runes and, you know, the narratives of myths, so that's where I'm going to be picky. If they want to depict some of the gods as having, you know, what looks like a different geographical origin, perhaps, or, you know, if they want to make Thor look a little heavier than he's usually portrayed, to me, that's actually well within the license that the original texts give us, in as much as they don't describe these beings very much at all. You know, one thing that I think is interesting, not just with this game, but with lots of games that deal with the ancient or medieval past, is the accents they choose. I always think it's kind of interesting the choices people make about who's going to sound more American, who's going to sound more British. You know, I think it varies a lot in terms of who's making it and what expectations they want us to give, right? I think people often give characters British accents when they're supposed to sound smarter. So,
if you'd like to watch even more of Jackson Crawford reacting to God of War, why not check out our video of him reacting to Thor's design in Ragnarok or 2018's God of War.